This is Season 3, Episode 8 of Mastering the RPG, a tabletop RPG podcast all about upping your game. Doesn't matter if you're a game master or player, you'll find advice, ideas, and some strong opinions. Our episode tonight is Failing Forward in Tabletop RPGs, or Failure is an Option. See, I threw that in there for all those Apollo 13 fans. Welcome again to Mastering the RPG, a tabletop RPG podcast. Like I said, it's about maximizing your game with ideas, cool stuff, opinions, emails, whatever, all sorts of stuff like that, and we hope you get something out of it. I'm Carl with my co-hosts Eric and James, and you'll find information about the show at masteringtherepg.com, and you can send us feedback or questions or mail, whatever, at gamemaster@masteringtherepg.com. And it's good to... We had a long break. Everybody was enjoying the holidays, so it's great to be back on the mics with everybody. So how's everybody doing? James, how are you doing? How are you doing in the...
I'm doing great.
In the land
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, we're in the land of very long summers and long cricket matches at the moment, so enjoying that. Five-day cricket matches, you just sit and watch boring cricket all day, which is really, really great. We're taking a break up here. I haven't had a role-playing game in a few weeks, and so looking forward to the next couple as we get started up into the new year games. I'm well into the, kind of creating session zeros at the moment where we're getting ready for a new campaign. So I start 4 new campaigns in 2 weeks, and so getting prepared for all of that stuff at the moment, which is a bit fun.
Yeah, it's summer there, and I'm sitting here looking at the weather, waiting for the snow to come for our white Christmas, and it never happened, and then you guys got 5-day cricket matches out in the beautiful sun, so okay, cool. Eric, so how you doing? What's up with you?
I'm doing all right. I mean, yeah, I'm like James, except for running games. I haven't played any games for like 3 weeks, so that's been interesting. I did a little bit of work on my stuff, but yeah, it's just been kind of a break from all the tabletop stuff. So it's good. This is like setting it off for the new year for a tabletop for me. So
beautiful. Personally, I
what have you got planned coming up in the weeks, Eric? Have you got anything coming forward? You got a game coming, or how's the setting going?
Oh yeah, the setting's going pretty well. I got a lot of the stuff fleshed out, and then yeah, just the game's kind of starting back up again. So
yep, sure.
Yeah.
Sorry, Carl, I interrupted.
No, it's everybody's got interesting stuff going on, and it's good to have a little time. I didn't have any games either because obviously Eric's in one of my games, but we celebrated our anniversary, and so we had a great live stream with the Peg guys for that before Christmas, and I world premiered the song I mentioned that I was going to do that.
Yeah.
And we world premiered that. Now I'm working on the music video. Because what's a song without a music video? Savage Worlds, the fan song. And so, yeah, it was nice to have a little bit of time. I got a chance to do a little prep, thinking about where the group might go and spending a couple of hours thinking through that instead of just doing it by the seat of my pants. So that was kind of nice. And then obviously it was good just to have some time with the family, get all the kids together and have a good time. So... didn't get any game stuff for Christmas or role-playing game stuff. I got a dice box, though. Somebody gave me one of these dice roller boxes that has where you put the dice in the tray around it, and then you pop open the lid, and you can pull the dice out and roll it. So somebody did get me that. So, but not books or anything like that.
I got the epitome of Hasbro taking over the gaming industry as a present. I got the Dungeons & Dragons version of Cluedo. Brought to you by Hasbro for Christmas, which was it's
Cluedo
kind of
is
like,
Clue, right? I think
that's right. Yeah,
okay.
Clue. Yeah. So the Dungeons and Dragons version of Clue was my
what
only
does it
role
have,
play.
Like Elminster and like
yeah.
What? Okay.
Yeah, and you go to Waterdeep and all these different. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous.
Killed in Waterdeep with a fireball. So I'm not
you
sure.
got it. Yeah.
Okay.
You killed in Waterdeep with a Hand of Orcus by Vecna. And yeah,
is there?
nuts.
Please tell me the immovable rod is one of the murder weapons.
I wish it totally
God.
should have been.
It should have been, yeah.
But that the Hasbro empire has completely done it now. It's amazing.
Yeah, before they collapse, right? I mean,
that's right.
They got rid of what was it, like half of their employees or
Yep.
quarter?
1,100 employees.
Crazy?
Yeah, yep.
Insane. Same.
And I think somebody said 800 of those were in the kind of the RP space. So there was a
The
significant
Wizard of the Coast, which
Yeah.
is bizarre because I think Magic the Gathering is what's keeping that company alive.
Yes.
Mostly. And then D&D, so... Anyways.
And there's
So maybe
plenty
not
of
enough
quality
people
YouTube
bought
videos.
D&D Clue.
Yeah, plenty of quality YouTube videos out there about the layoff and people's opinions and everything.
For sure.
I've been in industry long enough that I've gone through many a riff, seen people get laid off, and it's part of the business cycle. And people get upset that the CEO still made his big bonus, but welcome to corporate America. That's just the way it is, guys. Just because it's an RPG role-playing game company, that's just the way it is. The CEO is going to make his cash, and the workers are going to get laid off before Christmas. So, anyway, but I'm not bitter.
We digress.
I've never been ripped, but
Seize the method of production, brothers.
take the means of production. Yeah. All right. So hey, with that,
I see a new setting here.
So with that kind of intro, we don't have any email today, but so I think without further ado, we'll hit the main topic.
Mastering the RPG with Connor, Eric, and James. Yeah.
All right, main topic, failing forward in tabletop RPGs. So the first and obvious thing we need to define is what does it mean to fail forward? Now, I think everybody's going to have a little bit different definition. I've got mine, which is where failure is not a simple no, you didn't do it, too bad, so sad. It's more there could be some complications or consequences that do lead to moving the story forward. Maybe there's a happenstance that happens based on your failure that lets the narrative continue, or you're going to succeed anyway, but there's some cost that comes along with that success. So you're succeeding anyway, but there's a cost, or it's not just a simple failure. There's something that helps you move the story along. So like an example would be a player wants to find the Thieves Guild, spots a pickpocket, chases them down, but they get away. So simple failure is like they got away, too bad. Failing with kind of forward is maybe they drop something, maybe there's some clue that they can pick up on, and now there's another group of adventures that get them to the same point, but there were consequences and it took time to get through that. So those are my definitions. I don't know. What are your definitions, guys, because I feel like this conversation is going to be a little more yin and yang and trying to figure out how things are going or what our thoughts are. So I don't know, Eric, what's your definition of failing forward?
Well, yeah, I think I have a broader view on it, especially we were talking about it beforehand a little bit. But what you said is certainly the archetypal version. That's the one that, like, Powered by the Apocalypse games pretty much mechanized. In those games, you can get like a partial success, or I forget what it's called, a minor success, right? The thing still happens, but like something bad along, you lose something, like you said. That is like the main version. But I think anything that incentivizes, like gives you a resource, like there's some games where you fail and you get like luck points when you fail, and you can use those later. Or like even narratively, like Savage Worlds, Carl, like where your hindrance comes up in a way that messes with you or kind of disrupts your plans, and then you're rewarded for that you could then use later to succeed because you can re-roll.
Yeah, you get the penny
so
for it.
That's the kind of broader view that I have. I also see failure forward in things that we've talked about where, there's never like even if that like one avenue is closed, maybe something else happens, or like a twist, like the kind of how you recover from failure. And there's things for players too. But yeah, what you said is definitely the main version, but I think some games have mechanized it in that way of like rewarding players in some way for failing that they can then use later to succeed, right? So I think there's just two different ways where either you succeed and something bad happens, or you're kind of given something to use at a later time to succeed. That's how I look at it, at least from basics.
Yeah, we played around with a little bit of a house rule where if you critically failed, then it gave you inspiration to kind of re-roll the dice at a later area. So it's about removing that demoralizing feature of that I just didn't succeed at, and there it is. And it's trying, I guess, in some ways, it's trying to stop the dead endness of skill checks and dice rolls within role-playing games, because that's what we're really talking about, isn't it? We're talking about saving throws or skill checks or some kind of relatively simple mechanic that when it fails, we've now blocked the game off, or we're unable to kind of continue the story going, is half the issue here, which might be why, as a games master, we're trying to fail forward or trying to solve this as a problem. So, in your great example, if you are racing through the pickpocket, you're trying to catch the pickpocket and just were unable to catch the pickpocket, does that mean the story or the narrative ends at that point? So it's trying to kind of make sure that the narrative can continue, is my definition of it. Yep. Sorry.
Yeah, and no. I'm just gonna go on top of that. It's like we've talked about this a lot, and this is one of our things in some of our other game mastering episodes where, we often caution, especially new game masters, don't write yourself into a corner. Don't, if you have only the one solution to the thing, then you can often get stuck. But I think that failing forward kind of gives you an out on that, right? Where you can shift that and say, okay, you just succeed, but this thing happens, and that's something that I think we should look at here. Is that there's certain games that have baked this mechanic in whatever way into the rules, but like you said, there's the house rule that you have for D&D, where if somebody fails, you give them inspiration. We can hack those games, and you can use that in any game that you play. And I think that's a lot of things we're going to talk about today, is that how can you kind of hack that into game, because some games have that mechanic baked in, right? If you're playing a Powered by the Apocalypse game, that is literally how their rolls work. You fail a game, but then you fail a roll, but it still succeeds. But like you said,
but there is
another
a
example in my top of my
yeah.
head, you're climbing, you fail your athletics check. Okay, you don't fall to your death, because that would suck, but you lose a bunch of gear.
Yeah.
The gear is gone, but you still climb up to the top.
And I think that's important.
I
think it's important what you're saying is that this is not letting the players just succeed regardless of what happens. There's still consequences. There's still a failure of some type, and there's consequences, complications, but we don't stop moving the narrative forward. And like you said, Eric, you could fall to your death, and then that's just, you failed, sorry. But there's still a consequence. We're not just going to say, okay, well, you failed your roll, but it didn't matter anyway. You got up the mountain because failure. We don't want failure because we don't want you to fall to your death. So failing forward means there's still a fail, or there's a succeed with the cost related to it, like Powered by Apocalypse, or some of those systems have.
But like I said before, my other version of this for me, in the kind of wider view, is those ones that give you a reward almost for failing, and in that case they can still fail, but then they have some type of meta currency, like a Benny, right, where you give them a Betty for failing, so later on they can then roll to succeed when they want to. So it kind of, I think there's just a broader view of just the whole you succeed with consequences. There's other ways you can go about it, and it even broader than that. There's narrative things that you can do too. So I just wanted to make sure that's what I said is a broader view.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. James, any other thoughts on just kind of how we would define it, or how we package up this concept?
No, I think we've covered it. I guess I'd like to move on and talk a bit more about why we would do it, or some of the challenges in doing it.
So why is it important? So
it's a tricky. Yeah. In some ways, I'm not entirely wedded to this idea. I do use it in some ways, but I have a little bit of a different, or a caveat.
Come on, dish it.
A lot of what we're talking
Come on,
about
we want to hear it.
Yeah. In failure, in some ways, is what makes these games, as opposed to collaborative stories. And I think there is a risk when you do fail forward, where every attempt is a success, but it is a success with a consequence. I actually believe that failure should be an option, being able to just straight out not be able to do things. Where it becomes complicated is that narrative dead end. If you are unable to do it, and therefore we can't continue the story, then that doesn't work. That's not a game either. That's just a kind of scene end. Oh, well, that's as far as we got. Sorry about this. We have to finish. But in some ways, I still like the idea of failing, and I still like the idea of and I guess, sorry, I'm not making a lot of sense here.
No, you were.
I guess what we're trying to do with failing forward is remove some other issues that are in a lot of these role-playing games. And in some ways, I think the failing forward is a solution to things like endless dice rolling. When you have 6 characters, the first character tries to pick the lock, and then that doesn't work, and I'll try, until eventually you get a success. In some ways, I think failing forward is doing something a little bit different as well. It means that the first person that fails, there is a consequence, and therefore the narrative continues. But I still don't completely agree that you can remove failure off the table by using failing forward, because I think it intrinsically changes the nature of a game as opposed to a story. But that's my 2 bits there, I guess, before we move on.
No, I don't disagree with you. Like, that's totally right. And I think when we're talking about this, like, we're obviously not talking about a specific system. And like I said, some systems have this built in, and we're not really talking about that from a specific system. We're talking about this agnostically, or how can you borrow these into any tabletop game you're playing, right? And
Yep.
I think you're absolutely right, James. Like, if you want to use any of these, it's all about balance, and it's all about using it when appropriate. I think in your example, like, yeah, failure is important for these games, and you have to like we talked about, like, sometimes you write yourself into a corner. That's when it's appropriate to use. And I also think it changes the nature of the game. Like, what type of game are you running? Like, if that homebrew rule of giving inspiration on a failure, that is that's going to feel of a more pulpy game, right? Where the heroes are bigger than life. Like, even when they fail,
They still
they have the
succeed in
sense of
some ways,
succeeding
yeah.
later. So that is that type of game. So you definitely have to. Well, while I like using these mechanics a lot, it has to match the type of game the type of story that you want to play. So, like, Savage Worlds is pretty much all pulpy, right? That's where Benny's work. So if you want to have a game where, like, if you're playing D&D and you want a game that feels more like these are heroes, then that homebrew rule of giving inspiration on a critical failure, something bad happens with the critical failure, but then you give them inspiration, or you reward them for playing out their critical failure well or something. That's that specific type of game. So I think with all things, just be wary as a game master. Like, don't rely on it too much, or just know what you're getting into.
I think that's
the biggest challenge.
I think that's the key is when we talk about failing forward, it's not we always fail forward, right? In my mind, there are times when you fail and you just fail. The dice weren't in your favor. Bad things happen. There's consequences for failure, but it's the idea that it doesn't stop the game in its tracks. Those consequences aren't things just stop, and then nobody's having fun because everybody's scratching their head as to what's going on. Now, there's solutions to that, like there's the 3 clue rule, for example, which helps with the problem where if you build a mystery adventure and one dice roll can stop them from solving the problem, you might say, hey, I'll fail forward, and then they get something else, and that helps them move forward. Well, you could avoid that just by doing the 3 clue rule, where you have 3 clues that are possible to find, and each one leads. So it's failing forward's not a necessity, and sometimes failing is just failing, but it's the idea that when there is a failure, there's complications, there are consequences, but the narrative doesn't stop. That there's a cost, but you still are moving forward. And like my example of the pickpocket, it just doesn't end. There's now a note that gives them a clue or something, but now they have to go through a different set of adventures. They can't do things the easy way. They have to do things the hard way, but the narrative doesn't stop. So I guess what I'm saying is I totally agree with you. It can't always be a thing you do, because then, it's a game. There's sometimes failure is just failure. Like you said, failure sometimes is an option without the failing forward process. That was a lot of words for, I think, saying the same thing you guys were.
No, again, and on the other side of the coin, I guess, with the meta currency failing forward, even if you don't do that for your whole game, I think it's sometimes a good tool to use. If you have a player who's just having a really bad luck and just constantly failing like a bunch of rolls, that can be kind of demoralizing for a player. So rewarding them occasionally with like a reroll or like luck points, we might get into a little bit more, can kind of, soften the blow a little bit, and then also give them the chance to then succeed later on. Like sometimes the dice just really are not in your favor, and that's not always fun. So I think it's also good to a game master to kind of use it occasionally to, like to figure out a way to reward them for all these failures. Like they like if they're getting demoralized. So yeah, I think
and
again,
that's
I have
that demoralization is why we're trying to avoid this, right? So
Yeah.
we do this massive build up. It's the pinnacle of a game. You say, all right, do your big speech, and then let's have the persuasion roll at the end of it to see how well you landed your message. And then they fail the persuasion roll, and you go, well, but it's the culmination, and it was supposed to be so epic, and it was supposed to be so great. How can we continue that forward, acknowledge that there's a failure, but do a narrative somewhere else, I guess, because no one likes that crestfallen, that was supposed to be such a great roll, and it just didn't come off as well as it could have.
Yeah. Or when somebody is just like, why am I even why do I even playing? Like, or this, why am I the rogue? I can't pick a pot. I've tried to pick a pocket 10 times, and I'm just like suck at it. That's when you're just like, okay, like this time you get, whatever, like, or you start to
but that's where
implement,
success with the cost
3 critical
comes in.
failures, you get
It's
exactly.
like you can pick people's pockets, but you failed, and that now means the person noticed, and fun can ensue. I mean, you're a rogue. You should be able to pick a pocket of the peasant walking down the street. A poor roll doesn't mean you didn't pick the pocket. It just means that maybe the person noticed, and they turn and they confront you, and now hilarity ensues as fun times. As you're flat-footed, red-faced, trying to explain. Now you got some persuasion roll time to to try to explain what was going on there. So, anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I guess my just point was that, like, if they then role play out their failure, like, I think because D&D inspiration is just one of those things where people just don't get inspiration that much, and they usually only get it for being like heroic, right? But that could be a good time to the failure. If you let the failure happen, it could be the good time if they're role playing it out or what they're going through. Like, okay, you get inspiration. Like, you get inspiration for how you acted with your failure. That's all I meant to say, is that you can also play that tack instead of doing the partial success type of thing.
So it's important for making the game satisfying because of like you said, the rogues continually fail, so maybe there's a meta current to help out. It keeps the story moving along, so a simple failure isn't just a failure. But I think the challenges are what hit us, because we've already talked about, well, you use it sometimes, you don't use it sometimes. How does the game system help that? Oh, I've got a home rule where I use inspiration, and so let's talk about some of the challenges. Maybe I'll start with James. What are some of the challenges that you perceive in being able to fail forward in a meaningful, useful way?
There's a couple in my mind. The first one is, so the idea of narratively failing forward, so just to be clear, so this isn't about the inspiration or the bennies or that kind of stuff. This is the narrative part of it. The idea being that you fail, then you don't actually fail, you still succeed. So you climb to the top of the wall, but all your equipment falls down, or something happens. I think one of the challenges is if you're using this consistently, and in some ways you possibly should, you should kind of use it relatively consistently so that at least it doesn't feel like you're stepping in, oh, this one's important narratively, so therefore we'll fail forward on this roll. That can sometimes feel a little bit forced. But the other problem you have is if you're involving complications to each failed roll, there's a tendency for that to kind of explode. So, the first complication, you've lost half your equipment. Oh, well, I'll stop and I'll climb down the rope then to try and pick up the equipment that I lost. All right, well, you need to make another roll, athletics check to climb down the rope. Oh, I failed that one. Oh, okay. You kind of, now the complications are becoming one and more and more and more and more. If you're providing an extra piece of information on each failed roll, you can often flood your game with these kind of distracting red herring bits of information on failed rolls as well. So, I fail my investigation roll. Well, you're not quite sure exactly who's involved, but you find a little note that says, find the one-armed cobbler, on the note. And okay, we can continue the narrative forward, but is this a distraction from the actual core storyline? And that's some of the challenges, I think, with failing forward in a narrative sense.
Yeah, James, that's like totally pretty much what I was going to say too, is that you really have to, I think the trap here, especially for players, is to start thinking that the consequences aren't there as much anymore. And I think to your point, like with your example of the, climbing and your stuff falling, right? You have to make it known that, no, that's the consequence. Like that stuff is gone. Like it's gone. It fell, it's a tree, it's whatever, it's gone. You really have to still have there be consequences that matter and that stick. And that I think that is a trap that can definitely, like you said, that cascading kind of rolls based on it of people trying to it wasn't totally a loss, so I'm going to keep trying to recover whatever happened. Like no, you have to make it. You want there to be consequences that have to fit, and sometimes players can start to ignore that or think they're invincible because we never fail really. Right?
Yeah.
And I think that's when you're doing it, you really have to make sure the consequences are consequences and that matter to the players in some way. Doesn't always have to be like, oh, your husband got killed, right? But they have to matter in some meaningful way or mechanical way.
And that
So
combinational
when I was
explosion.
researching this a little bit, I came up upon an example, and it's there's a similar example as the pickpocket. But okay, you managed to grab the pickpocket, you managed to turn him around. You failed in the chase, but you see him just as his dagger strikes out, and you're now poisoned. Well, that's another complication where you've got to now go cure your poison, which distracts from the narrative, which distracts from the session in some way. So it can be all manner of how you fix this, but it adds another scene. It adds another complication. It adds another 15, 20 minutes, half an hour to your game. And sometimes just a failed dice roll is like, well, you didn't find anything. Sorry, let's move on. Do you know what I mean? Like it can sometimes distract in a very messy way.
To avoid that combinatorial explosion is what you're talking about, right? You've got a failure which branches to another failure which branches. I think it's, and this is why I mentioned, sometimes failing is just failing. It has to be in the right particular moment. Like, for example, you talked about you're at the top, the pinnacle of this discussion with the king, and it's, we're doing a roll for persuasion, and we're going to convince him to do something in a single roll. Oh, you just failed. So you did not persuade the king. Too bad, he's not going to war with you guys. Tough break. Well, that's an obvious place where it's not necessarily, the player doesn't have to necessarily understand that there's not consequences. There were. But now it's, he's asking for you to do something, or he's asking, you didn't lose at the pinnacle of this discussion with one roll. But, sneaking past a guard and doing something like that and you fail, okay, maybe the guard sees you. I mean, you got to, and the mechanics of the games are always success or fail. Not all of them, right? Because you mentioned that some of them have the partial success, but a lot of them have success, failure, and that's the easy part. That's baked in. But then doing something, understanding from a narrative standpoint where a success or a failure adds a consequence, but it doesn't always have to because it's not necessary. I think that's tough. It's the balance. That's what makes it hard to do, is trying to balance those things out. I'd say you really need to fail forward when it's the narrative's going to stop, right? The expectation is this pickpocket, you catch them or you find out something that leads you to the Thieves Guild. And this goes to when I talk about, when I think about is if you understand the goal versus the roll, the single roll you're going to do, it's like, I want to chase the pickpocket. Okay, that's great. But we understand the reason you're chasing them is you want to find where the Thieves Guild is. So if there is a failure in that chase, you can provide them something that still leads them towards the Thieves Guild. Not necessarily has to have 5 different scenes to get there, but they have a different route that maybe is a little more difficult, maybe requires a little more effort, that versus just having grabbed them and then, shake them down, you tell us where it is, and he tells you where it is, and, that's the end of it. Now you need to do something else, but it's not, you don't want it to explode to say, now if that fails, there's going to be another thing you got to do, and another thing. At some point,
Yeah.
You
it
know,
takes up time.
there's an expectation. So
Well, my kind of partial solution for that is to most of the time, if you're utilizing this narrative failure forward mechanic, I guess, is most of the time have the consequence be resources, because those always matter to players, and whether it's money, whether it's equipment, whether it's spell slots or something, right? Those are always something that's going to matter to the players, but are not going to cause another scene to happen, right? So most of the time, if you just have them lose resources, in my mind, that's the solution to that problem, is because you're not going to create the problem of the cascading scenes, cascading whatever rolls, but it is going to hurt the players, right? They still, the pickpocket example is like, what they tried to follow the pickpocket. Like, yeah, they follow the pickpocket, but they didn't realize there was another pickpocket that was that stole a bunch of gold from them, right? Like that's how I think that. That's my solution. I guess then we're talking. I don't know. What do you guys think? Does that seem like a reasonable thing to do? Or
yeah, and that makes sense. And in some ways, yeah, you can continue the plot forward. So you can say, oh, you failed to catch the guy. But as he reaches out, you can feel that he's unclasped your kind of bracelet and taken your watch again. But then you see that he heads down the laneway towards the Thieves Guild. So I guess, in some ways, or a few hit points lost, that kind of vibe, just so that there is, I can see that.
I think that's
in Carl's example, like you said, like, oh, like there was a chase that happened that made it more complicated. Like something in Savage Worlds is a, I forget what it's called now. You know, the one roll where it's like a narrative kind of single roll, like. You said in that chase, you had to spend some spell, because it was so more difficult. You had to spend a spell to, leap over some type of obstruction, or you had to spend resources to then do what you wanted to do. So you could just say that as like a narrative, right? Narratively, you had to spend your spell slots or whatever, or you had to throw a dagger or something. So that's
I think that's there's many tools in the toolbox, and having that losing resources is always a good lever to use, for sure. I don't know if I'd use it all the time. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to have an additional thing that somebody might have to do, but it's definitely a good tool to have in a toolbox, because,
you
like
want to
you
mix
said,
it in.
Spell slots are valuable, money's valuable. In D&D, attrition's a big deal, right? So.
May I be somewhat of a devil's advocate here?
Please do.
Had we just failed at this point, right? So let's just say, no, you failed. And that's when the wizard says, I cast the spell to catch up with him, and therefore it's no longer a skill roll, but they have used their spell. They have used their resource. Aren't we just taking this from players having to use their resources to overcome adversity? Aren't we just doing this for them? If we just say, well, you make it, but you have to use a spell slot. Shouldn't
it depends on the game. Some games don't have spells that do that. My point is that, in the problem of you don't it's a good thing to mix in, to not always have, like you said, James, you get in that trap of. But yeah, I mean, you could say to the player, and this actually goes to something else I was going to talk about, but you could say to the player, well, you can still catch this person if you want to use that spell that you have.
Great, or that ability. That's it.
That's another. I don't know if this is in the complication, but this was kind of my hybrid version of in my mind, the two different versions of the narrative failure forward and the mechanical, the meta currency failure forward. And this is something that I've seen once before, or I've used once before, where this can be used in any single game. But basically, you have a currency that when somebody fails, or you just give them it to the beginning of the game, where basically when they fail a roll, they can say, "Okay, I'm spending my fate point," and then
luck points in Call of Cthulhu.
Whatever it is, whatever it is. But this is a hybrid, because this is not letting you re-roll. This is not giving you like a plus to your your final score. This is just saying, okay, I really wanted to succeed in this roll, so I'm going to spend my whatever you want to call it, and then it's failure forward. Then you're like, you succeeded, but with complications. So It kind of gives players a little bit of control when they want to have the failure forward. This is, like I said, it's kind of a hybrid of the two different versions. And this is one that I like the most, because it gives players that a little bit of control and a currency to play with, but then it is that failure forward thing. So in the case of the a player had, say, this fate point or whatever you want to call it, and in the king, they were like doing the big persuasion roll for the king, and they failed, and they're like, damn it, I really wanted to succeed. So I spend my point, and then you're like, okay, well, you did succeed, but then this bad thing happened. So that's
you
just
still
the
give them the
third
consequence.
hybrid version.
Sure.
But you could do
And
that.
that's it. You can take bits of this all the time, can't you? You can kind of, but it's a tool to stop that narrative dead end. Yeah. Sorry, Carl.
No, I was just gonna say that puts it in the hands of the player to they can decide now whether they want to succeed or fail. Versus, when I thought of that example, it was more, well, the player, this was a big deal. The player failed. How can we make it so that the player succeeded at a cost, right? Or that, so we can. But Eric's saying, well, give them the currency, let them decide. They may just want to fail. Who cares that this is the big, most important thing? They want to fail and see what happens. Let them make that decision. So that's an interesting.
It could be something
approach.
they get like one per session, right, or something. Or if you wanted to play with this but didn't want to be doing it yourself all the time, that's what it might be. It's like this weird hybrid of once per session they have this thing that they can spend to change their role into success with problems.
That reminds me, I need to start giving you guys conviction in our game. I forgot to use it, so I love conviction in Savage Worlds. But
there's no limit on conviction, so yeah.
Well, technically, I don't think there's any limit in Savage Worlds either. I just limit it. So,
okay. So, I thought there was.
Well, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. So, yeah. So, any other challenges that these are all really, really, really good ideas. What other insights? I think you mentioned a little bit on the player side. Is there other things that a player should think about? That we talked a lot of GM stuff, but what about the players?
I mean, well, again, this is my broader view on this, and for players, when I think about failure forward, it's more about like capitalizing on failure as a player, because what do you do as a player? You don't have the control to really do this. So when I think of failure forward in the player's lens, it is really like, how do you use your failures to further your character in a way? And I don't know if I could like have my pipe and have the fire rolling and story time, but I mean, one of the things I'd say is that I often learn about a character as I play. Like even if I do a really long backstory, right? Even if I have all my full character mechanics set up ahead of time, I often really do learn about a character the more I play. Like I understand their its hindrances or flaws in D&D. I understand those more, or they change. And one of the things that you can do, I think, with failure is that you can really, well, there's several things that you can kind of use failure for yourself as a player to enhance your character story or enhance how you communicate. And that's what I want to think of. And my story here is the very first game I played with Carl, I had this really, really funny, great character named Fable, who was a genetically altered cat person who like venerated his cyberware, so had like mystic abilities. And he was, we've talked about him before. He was a complete, I first started him as impulsive, but I kind of changed him later to daredevil, because what I learned with him, especially through failure, is that his whole thing was he liked to show off to people because that's how he got worth. Because he felt like if he wasn't like the best, if he wasn't like doing these amazing things, people would leave him. That was the thing that I came to realize. And it really came to head where in this game, I rolled so well all the time. I used double mono whips on a motorcycle, which with these mono whips, if you rolled a 1, not even a critical failure, you attacked yourself. And I like never failed at all, ever. Like I tried to hurt myself and it never, right, Carl? Like it just, I was just
never.
rolling amazing in this game. And this one time, Carl introduced this pop character that was a animal hybrid, and I just came up with it. Oh, my character's a huge fan of this character. Just loves this musician, this hybrid. And we got the chance to be her bodyguard or be their bodyguard. And my character just wanted to impress them so bad and did this I said okay, I'm doing a trick on my motorcycle, and I critically failed, which never happened in that game. And so I described my failure, or the motorcycle fell on me. I think I farted. But my whole point of this is that I then really got, because most of the other players only saw my character being this bravado-y kind of action star, but they really got to then, I really capitalized on this failure and showed them kind of a crack in the mask. And it was like a chance for my character. When I built this thing up so much that I was like in love with this person, and that this was the worst failure pretty much that my character could think of. And it let them see a vulnerability to my character that they never saw before. Like, I really played it up of like he was being embarrassed and like, soft spoken, which never happened before with that character. So I guess I'm kind of, rambling, but I really you want to capitalize on your failures to maybe, either show backstory for your character that they never saw before, like use it as a chance to show backstory, or use it as a chance to kind of break through the mask of your character, because all our characters wear masks, right? Usually they have some type of front that they show, like everybody does, and so it's a good chance to reveal stuff about your character that you never revealed before to your other players, or like build onto your backstory, I guess. So I don't know if that was too rambly. You guys get what I'm saying here? Of like, that's how
absolutely. And look, part of the as a player, look, I think it's part of the game. Failure is actually part of the fun. If you succeed at everything, you're kind of you're not really getting the enjoyment out of it. I love role playing failure. I love role playing. I'm currently playing a bard paladin that should be able to persuade everyone everything. And every time I fail, it's because I've got a coughing fit or something's gone wrong or I've insulted their family, or you kind of get into why that might be. And that's half the fun in my mind in terms of role-playing when things don't go your way. But if we are playing a failing forward game, and as a player, one of the things that I've seen is in a lot of ways you begin this negotiation when you fail. And in some ways, I think as a player, you can provide the option for failing forward. So I leap across the gap between the building, chasing after the pickpocket. I fail. Well, rather than plummet to my death, can I grab hold and gash my arm so that it damages me badly?
Yeah.
But allows me to continue the chase. I'll take some damage, but can I continue to go through it? It's as a player, offering the option or offering the consequence can also lead to some really great role play. I didn't convince the king, but my oration, is it possible that I failed that, but it has persuaded someone else within the room to join the cause. You can kind of offer the alternative, offer the consequence, offer the explosion, the difference. If you're playing, is something that I've seen. I find that before kids get too involved in the rules of a game, they often negotiate from the outset. They'll say, "Oh, yeah, but if I do this, could it work?" And so in some ways, kind of continuing that level of negotiation in gameplay can also help really, really well as a player.
And that's really just playing off of a lot of game masters when somebody has a critical fail or some really bad failure. You ask the player, what did that failure look like? This is just another version, right? I failed, but it's not as bad, or I'm going to tell you what I think the consequence could be that we both can agree on that's bad, but I'm not plummeting to my death. Here's something more interesting, Game Master, that you might find more interesting to take part of. It sounds like you said, there's a little bit of a negotiation there going on. And again, we always talk about these things being shared stories, shared narrative. That's a good point. You can help share that narrative by offering those suggestions and saying, well, yeah, my character failed and here's what happened, if that's okay, so.
Yeah. And my point before was just that using failure to then, it's often easier for me to use failure as a point of revealing character stuff than it is succeeding, because like when you're succeeding, you're just you don't need to show any vulnerability. You don't need to show any of your skeletons in your closet, right? Most of the time. So failure is just, it's an easier way to get those things in that you want. And for you to like maybe, try different skills, like try a different approach. It almost forces you to be creative to kind of try a different way than you would think, or like try a different kind of approach for your character and then use that.
And this is in some ways why I don't particularly like failing forward, in that characters, and particularly a group of characters, has a whole heap of different ways to tackle a problem. And if you fail the first time, that's okay, because someone else might have a different approach, or you might have to use an entirely different thing where you go, all right, we failed to follow the cut purse that stole our gear. All right, now he's run away. We still need to find where the Thieves Guild is, so let's start to bribe urchins around the town to find where you can kind of, it doesn't have to completely derail. The players have a huge amount of resources at their hands in order to solve these problems, and I guess that's part of the fun. I, for example, I don't allow any more than 2 people to make a dice roll, for example, to stop this kind of everyone gets a go. It's just a house rule. After 2 people have had a go and they've failed, the rest of you would just assume that it's really, really hard. That's like, well, there's a trust here that if 2 have failed, then we don't continue. So, in some ways, I think players have a lot of resources to do different ways and approach a problem with it from a different angle.
That's true. I mean, definitely this concept is not a hammer for every nail, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And lastly, and the same thing of like capitalizing failure, and this is something we've talked about it a lot before, and this even goes to like burning out as a game master, is that it's also a good time when there's that failure, instead of maybe saying, okay, you succeeded, but this happened, like you could also use that failure as a jumping off point to do a side quest or do something else, right? Like it could be also a good opportunity that then enriches the players too. Like that's my point, is that like it can be good to break up your narrative as a game master to then, okay, well you're locked out of the king, but now you have this whole quest with the minister. You have to do you have to do some type of quest for them, and then they'll support you, and it's the same outcome at the end. But it gives you a chance to then write something new. It might, as a game master, it's like a reward for you because you're having that time to like do a little break, do a little different type of narrative or whatever. Just much like a player, capitalizing on that.
Interesting. As long as we don't have that combinatorial explosion of a failure during the quest leading to another, yeah.
Exactly.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now you need the minister's manservant to convince the minister to convince the king. Now you need the minister's manservant's wife.
Yeah. Cousins, laundry person's brother.
That's right.
Oh, yeah. Okay, there you go. So any final thoughts that you guys have before we close off here? What would you say? I'd say failing forward is, again, not something that you always do, but it's also a tool in the toolbox for when, you want failure to have consequences, but there really needs to keep the narrative moving forward. And I think Eric mentioned, you've prepped yourself into a corner, I guess he said, but it's a tool in your toolbox that allows you to keep the game moving forward. It's not, success isn't always success. Sometimes there's consequences or there's things that happen, but failure sometimes is just failure. And we can't just always let the players succeed in some shape or form. So James.
Yeah. And
oh, go ahead, Eric.
Sorry. I was going to say, yeah, that's definitely it. Like, it's something to be used sparingly. On the other side, again, if you want to make any type of game you're running, it doesn't matter. Any type of tabletop game, you can provide some type of meta currency to make it feel more pulpy or more over the top or more heroic, right? Just that nudge of even when they fail, it makes the characters have a chance to succeed later. And that's either, just to reiterate again, there's the reroll mechanic, which bennies or inspiration. There's I think fate points or luck points or whatever, where they're given some type of 1 point or 2 points or 3, and then they can spend that after a roll to then increase their roll to meet the DC or whatever. And then again, there's the hybrid of what I said. And the hybrid version, though, I think won't make them feel overly heroic. I think if you want to have kind of that meta currency, but not have it be over the top, like a Savage World type game or a Powered by the Apocalypse game, then having that, giving them the one kind of one currency to spend when they want to make the partial success thing. I think that'll give a good middle ground. But again, I think with all of this, it's just being aware of what you're getting yourself into and not overdoing it. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, I think there are ways that you can avoid the problem that failing forward solves. I think is my final point. The 3-clue rule, not asking for rolls unless they're actually important, because we've talked a bit about the rogue should be able to pickpocket the peasant. And, would you really need a roll for it? Or wouldn't it should just happen, yeah? So trying to remove some of the things that get you to the narrative dead end, in my mind, is probably a little bit better. If you are playing a game that fully leans into fail forward, I think it would create a very different role-playing experience. I must admit, I haven't run a fully in the system yet, so that's something that I'd like to do. But my final thoughts are, if you can avoid it, I'd avoid it. Is that bad?
No, it's not. That's your opinion. I mean, that's how
That's
you
why
roll.
there's 3 of us here. We all have opinions. You remember that part I talk about in the beginning? And some strong
that's
opinions.
right.
So
We finally found one.
yeah, I didn't put that in there just for my fun and excitement. I mean it. With 3 folks, all have different games and play different games, and so definitely going to have different opinions. So excellent. I think that was a great treatise on where to use it, when not to use it, know when to fold them, know when to run when it comes to failing forward, and so excellent. So hey. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. I hope you got something out of it. Remember to drop by masteringtherpg.com to learn about other projects and things we're working on. Contact us, support us. Email gamemaster@masteringtherpg.com if you have a question, need some advice, want some difference of opinion to be adjudicated. We're all over that. You can see that we all have differences of opinion.
Or to tell me that I'm entirely wrong, please shoot us an email to say, James is an idiot. You should use failing forward.
Yes. Let's get an email that says that we can read it on air. That'd be fine. But I'll also offer some interesting insight too, because then James won't feel as bad. So, So hey, if you like the show, please give us a positive review wherever you get your podcasts. And we love to keep doing the show. So again, thanks for supporting. And so once again, this is Carl with Eric and James. Say goodbye, guys.
Goodbye, guys.
Happy gaming.